If I were to ask you who is the most unique figure in all of human history, what would you say? Well, I'm going to show you that it's going to be really hard to beat this guy.
Welcome.
Don't tell me just to believe it. I need the facts. What are the facts? This is not a faith issue, it's a fact issue. Historical fact. Scientific fact. The evidence is overwhelming, and we're going to look at that. So back in history, they thought this guy was really important, obviously. And we only know about 3 years of his life, but way back around the time that he was living, a lot more people knew. And they wrote down what they saw. Eyewitnesses. A very weighty thing in a court of law are eyewitnesses. So eyewitness accounts sometimes aren't the best thing unless you have a lot of people saying the same thing. If you don't believe it when you've got many different people saying the same thing, if you don't believe that, then you're probably going to be wrong. I'm going to deal with the larger things that all of the Gospels have in common. And what are the Gospels? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The first 4 books in the New Testament. The New Testament is made up of many books. First 4 books are considered the Gospel. But these are all eyewitnesses. All of these books are eyewitnesses in one form or another. It's not the telephone game. It's not hearsay. It's not secondhand. It's either eyewitnesses or people that interviewed eyewitnesses. So what were all these guys saying Jesus was doing? Well, he said he performed a lot of miracles. More miracles than anyone in the history of mankind ever, by far. And greater miracles, far greater miracles than anyone else in history, by far. He healed blind people. He fed the masses when they went to see him out in the wilderness. The fact that people had to go see him out in the wilderness is another evidence that he wasn't just a philosopher, that he was actually performing these miracles. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so popular. He couldn't even enter into towns. This man was so popular, and it wasn't from his fine-sounding philosophies. They had to go see Jesus in the wilderness because so many people were constantly thronging after him. He couldn't even enter into towns. He was so popular. And when he did enter into a town, it was a mob scene. It wasn't so much what he was saying. They wanted to see a miracle. They wanted to get healed. They wanted to get fed. Nobody in the history of the world has ever done anything like this. He fed, estimated to be 10,000 men, women, and children with 7 loaves of bread and a few fish. Come on, folks. We've never seen anything like this ever in all of human history. But the fact that Jesus performed all these miracles is not the proof of his divinity. The proof of his divinity is him calling that he was going to go to Jerusalem, get killed, and then raised from the dead 3 days later. That's why we celebrate Easter, folks. It was around this time, about 2,000, a little over 2,000 years ago, where Jesus was put up on the cross, crucified, died, and rose again 3 days later. And what is the evidence that we have of that? Again, hundreds of eyewitnesses that saw him raised to life again. He appeared to them. He appeared to hundreds of people, not just the disciples. Hundreds of people. Most people don't realize that. It actually says it in the Bible. Hundreds of people he appeared to. And don't think he didn't die on that cross, folks. The reason why he was crucified is because they wanted him dead. Romans never let anybody go. If you went up on that cross, you were going to die. And they broke the legs of the criminals that were crucified next to him. And to make sure Jesus was dead, they didn't break Jesus' legs. Instead, he was already dead. But they made sure he was dead by sticking a lance up into his heart. And that's part of the proof that he was dead, because what came out first was water and then blood. And any doctor will tell you this, that when someone dies, the pericardium, which is on the outside of the heart, fills up with water. So when a lance goes up into the heart, it goes through the water first, then into the heart, and then the blood comes out. So that is medical evidence that he was dead. The final evidence that all of this is true is the fact that every single one of the writers of the Gospels died a horrible death, except for John. They boiled him in oil, tried to kill him, but he survived somehow, and then he lived the rest of his life on an island. Now I want to ask everybody this. Would you die for something that you knew was a lie? Not only did these people die, they died gruesome deaths. Matthew was skinned alive. Peter was crucified upside down. John was boiled in oil, as I mentioned before. Luke was hung from an olive tree. They put a rope around Mark's neck and drug him through the streets until he was dead. Paul was beheaded. All these guys, all they had to do was say that what they wrote wasn't true, what they were preaching wasn't true, what they were telling other people, what they saw with their own eyes, and the things that they were witnessing, all they had to do is say that it wasn't true, and then the Romans wouldn't have killed them. But they knew that they couldn't deny God because they knew it was the truth. And so they watched their families get fed to the lions and burned at the stake, burned alive in the Colosseum. They watched their families get eaten by lions and burned alive in the Colosseum. They watched their children, their wives, their friends, and themselves get murdered because of what they were saying. If it wasn't the truth, folks, they wouldn't have done it. So there are all these evidences and more that Jesus walked the earth 2,000 years ago. He did all the miracles. He came back from the dead. We have thousands of years of witnesses, and if we were to talk about it all, we wouldn't have enough time. So keeping it short, this is a really brief presentation of the facts. And now you know.